What do you do when everyone's looking at you for answers and you're still trying to figure out what just happened? That's when real leadership shows up. Not when things are smooth, but when plans fall apart, pressure's rising, and you're the one expected to hold the room together. In this video, I'll show you how to stay calm and lead with clarity, even when everything feels like it's going sideways. Welcome to the Everyday Diplomat, where we equip leaders with real-world strategies to lead with clarity, presence, and influence when it matters the most. I'm Michael Forrest, the Everyday Diplomat, and today we're talking about how to stay calm and lead with confidence, especially when everything feels like it's going sideways. Let's talk about what it really feels like to lead in a crisis. It's that moment when something goes wrong, maybe something big, and everyone turns to you. They're not just looking for answers, they're looking to see how you're reacting, because whether they realize it or not, they're taking emotional cues from the way that you carry yourself. And here's the part no one really prepares you for. Sometimes you don't have the answers. You're still piecing together what even happened. But the pressure to look like you've got it under control, that lands on you instantly. I felt that weight numerous times throughout my career. As a sergeant major in the Marine Corps, if something reached me, it wasn't minor. It meant the usual systems had already been overwhelmed. Section leaders had already tried to handle it, and now it was mine. Sometimes it was the tragic, unexpected death of a Marine. Other times it was serious misconduct involving federal authorities, or a personnel crisis unraveling faster than anyone could respond. Whatever it was, the moment I walked into that room, the atmosphere had already shifted. Marines would be on edge, leaders unsure of what came next. And the question that hung in the air without anyone saying a word was always the same. What now? And before I said anything, I paused and I took a breath. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because they needed to see that I wasn't shaken. That breath was the first reset. The room shifted because I wasn't feeding the chaos. I was slowing it down. And that's what leadership under pressure really is. It's not about jumping to fix. It's not about talking first or moving fast. It's about anchoring the team by how you show up, by being the calmest person in the room, even if everything inside of you is racing. Because in a crisis, your presence speaks louder than your plan. Here's something I've seen time and time again. In crisis, the strongest leaders aren't the ones shouting commands from the front. They're the ones walking with their people through the unknown. Not ahead, not above, but with. And it doesn't always take words. Sometimes it's just presence. Just a quiet moment that says, I'm with you, you're not alone. One day, my family and I were out walking near a bridge, and my youngest son hesitated. He wasn't sure about what was on the other side. He stood still, no panic, just uncertainty. And his brother didn't say a word. He just reached over and took his hand. That was it. No instructions, no push, just, I've got you. That moment has stayed with me because I've seen it in the real world as well. I've led teams through high-stakes environments, combat zones, broken units, organizations in transition. And I can tell you from experience, you don't rebuild trust with commands. You rebuild it by walking the bridge together. In every crisis I faced, the teams that held together weren't just well-trained. They were connected. There was trust earned, not demanded. And that trust started with presence. See, people don't need heroes in a crisis. They need someone steady beside them. Someone who isn't flinching at the unknown. Someone who says, without saying, I'm right here with you. So if you're in a leadership role and the grounds feel shaky, don't feel like you have to charge ahead with perfect answers. Sometimes the strongest move is to simply reach out and walk the bridge together. There's a moment in every crisis where the tempo spikes, the noise rises, and people start moving fast because they feel like movement means control. But here's the truth. Speed without clarity, it's just chaos in disguise. One of the most valuable leadership tools I've learned, especially in high-pressure situations, is something I call a tactical pause. It's not delay, it's not hesitation, it's a conscious decision to pause, to observe, to orient, and then to act with clarity. It might be just 5 seconds, it might be 5 minutes, but that pause, that's where the best decisions begin. I've used it in situations where stakes were high and time was tight. Moments where leaders were panicking, people were watching, and everything was moving too fast. And just taking that beat, that moment to slow my breathing, to read the room, and to ask what's really going on here made all the difference. One of my go-to phrases is, don't match the chaos. Because in crisis, if you don't take control of the rhythm, someone else will. And usually it'll be fear. The tactical pause isn't just a leadership tool, it's a discipline. It creates space for your team to steady themselves. It keeps you from reacting emotionally and instead allows you to respond with intentionality. You don't always get more time in a crisis, but you can create more space, even just enough to make the right next move. That's the difference between reacting blindly and leading with clarity. Leadership in crisis doesn't just test your decisions, it tests what you're anchored to. Because when everything around you feels unstable, your people are watching to see if you're steady. And here's what I found over the years. The leaders who stay calm under pressure, they aren't pulling that calm out of thin air. They're drawing it from somewhere deeper, something more personal, more grounded. For me, that anchor in part came from the men in my family who even my parents looked up to. Papa Al, my grandfather, he was a master craftsman. Uncle Ronnie served as a fire chief, and my Uncle Jim was a lieutenant general in the United States Army. 3 very different professions, but the same foundations. They carried themselves with quiet strength. They dressed well, treated others with dignity, and they didn't chase attention, but when they spoke, you sure listened. Even as a kid, I didn't fully understand the weight they carried, but I felt it. And years later, when I found myself walking into rooms thick with tension, uncertain of what I'd find on the other side, I drew from their examples. How they showed up, how they didn't let chaos shift their character, how they led with calm even when the stakes were high. That kind of leadership doesn't come from a title. It comes from values that run deep. So let me ask you, when the pressure rises, what are you anchored to? Because if you haven't done the work to answer that question ahead of time, you'll find yourself reaching for the stability in the middle of the storm. And that's a hard time to go looking for it. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice. Because presence, poise, and composure, they're not traits, they're skills. And just like any skill, they can be developed. So here are 3 tools that I've used personally and professionally to stay grounded and lead with focus when the pressure is on. Tool number 1, the micro pause. In moments where you feel the urgency spiking, take 1 breath before you respond. Just 1. It doesn't matter if it's a heated conversation, a crisis update, or someone waiting for a decision. That 1 breath, it resets your nervous system. It buys you half a second of clarity, and it sends a message to your team, we're still in control. Tool number 2, anchoring rituals. I've used small physical cues, things like straightening my posture, placing both feet flat on the floor, or glancing at my moral compass that sits prominently on my desk. I use that to center myself before I speak or act. It sounds simple, but it creates a moment of internal alignment. It reminds you who you are, what you value, and how you want to show up, especially when the pressures are high. Tool number 3, intentional debriefs after the moment passes. Don't rush on like nothing happened. Sit down with your team and unpack it all. What went right? Where did we steady each other? What would we do differently next time? This builds trust, and it teaches your people that clarity doesn't stop when the crisis ends. It continues in reflection. None of these tools are dramatic, but that's the whole point. Because when the pressure's on, it's not the flashy stuff that holds the team together. It's the quiet discipline, the practice pause, the habit of just showing up steady. You don't need to do everything. Just start with 1 thing. Try it this week. Try it today. Leadership in crisis isn't about having all the answers. It's about showing up steady when everything else starts to shake. It's about being the person people look up to, not because you're the loudest voice in the room, but because you're the calmest. We've talked about presence, about walking with your people, about taking that tactical pause before you react, and about anchoring yourself to something deeper so you're not just scrambling for stability when the pressure hits. And here's the truth. The calmest leaders aren't born that way. They've done their work. They've trained for the storm, and they've practiced showing up the way that they want to be remembered. So if you're someone who's been thrust into leadership, whether in the military, business, or life, and you're carrying the weight of that responsibility, just know this. You don't need to be perfect, but you need to be present. Because your people are watching, and how you show up under pressure, that's what gives them permission to steady themselves as well. So the next time it all feels like it's going sideways, don't match the chaos. Pause, breathe, then lead. If any of this hits home, don't just let it sit with you. Take the next step and sharpen your leadership for when it matters the most. At everydaydiplomat.com, I've built a library of leadership courses packed with the tools, strategies, and mindset shifts I've personally used to lead teams through crisis, chaos, and real-world pressures. I've also recently published my first book, The Everyday Diplomat: How to Lead with Influence and Achieve Real-World Success, available now on Amazon as a hard copy, ebook, and an audiobook. Check the description below for the links. So, if you're ready to lead with calm, clarity, and real influence, start today. Click the links in the description, and I'll meet you inside the course. And until next time, remember, every business is a people business.